On the morning of August 24th, 1924, two brothers, Joseph and William Whitehead, shouldered their packs at Granite Park Chalet and prepared to descend the trail toward Lake McDonald. The sun rose pale through a gauze of mist that drifted along the peaks, softening the edges of the Continental Divide. From the chalet's porch, the view stretched endlessly, the ridges falling away toward forests that seemed to have no end. It was a morning so ordinary, so still, that nothing in it hinted at what would follow. The Whitehead brothers were not reckless men. Contemporary accounts described them as capable hikers, accustomed to the backcountry. They had stayed the night at the chalet, one of the rustic lodges built by the Great Northern Railway to serve early visitors to Glacier National Park, which had been established barely 14 years earlier. The logbook at Granite Park recorded their names and the date, their destination noted in a practice hand. To Lake McDonald. It was a simple entry, part of the routine movement of guests across the park's trail network. Nothing about it would have stood out. Their route, the Garden Wall Trail, wound along narrow ridges that fell away on both sides into vast valleys. In the 1920s, it was considered one of Glacier's most beautiful and accessible alpine passages, linking two of the park's best-known lodges. The brothers likely left after breakfast, following the trail southward as it climbed briefly toward Haystack Butte, then descended toward the valley floor. Rangers later confirmed that weather that day was fair and visibility good. It was a perfect morning for a hike. Sometime that afternoon, as they crossed into the higher switchbacks, the brothers disappeared. No one saw them leave the ridge. No one saw them arrive at the valley below. They did not reach Lake McDonald Lodge, then called the Lewis Hotel. By nightfall, their gear and clothing were never found, their path never retraced. They had simply walked into the wilderness and never returned. At first, no one panicked. In those years, Glacier was remote and communication primitive. Visitors often lingered at chalets or took side trails without notice. The telephone lines that connected ranger stations were unreliable, and there was no central registry for backcountry travel. When the Whitehead brothers failed to appear by the next day, hotel staff assumed they had been delayed by weather or chosen to camp overnight. By August 26th, word of their absence reached park headquarters. 2 days had passed since their expected arrival. Superintendent E.T. Scoian ordered rangers from both Granite Park and Lake McDonald districts to begin tracing the route. It was the start of one of Glacier's first organized missing person searches, a methodical, exhausting effort carried out without maps precise enough to show every drainage or ravine. The rangers moved deliberately, searching the 12-mile corridor between the chalet and the lake. They scoured steep slopes, gullies, and avalanche chutes, their only guides of faint indentations of boot prints or broken brush. Each day the search widened. Teams followed the Logan Creek and Trapper Creek drainages, calling out the brothers' names into forests that swallowed sound. Horses carried food and supplies to temporary camps as the operation stretched into weeks. Reports preserved in the 1924 annual report of the National Park Service later summarized it in one stark sentence. An extensive search lasting over a month failed to locate any trace. Behind that brief phrase lay a human effort vast in scale. Dozens of men climbing through fog and shale, marking grids across the mountainsides, hoping for a shred of evidence that never came. The weather turned colder as August gave way to September. Early snow dusted the high passes, and dense fog rolled in without warning. Searchers described visibility dropping to yards. Horses slipped on frozen rock. Camps were abandoned and re-established lower in the valleys. Still, the rangers pressed on, believing the brothers might have fallen into one of the deep crevices that score the garden wall, or become lost in a blind drainage. By the third week, the operation began to strain both manpower and morale. Superintendent Scoian coordinated patrols from Belton and Columbia Falls, enlisting local volunteers familiar with the terrain. They scoured the loch shores, creeks, and snowfields, circling outward from the original route. Nothing surfaced. No article of clothing. No campfire. Not a single fragment of evidence to suggest where the Whitehead brothers had gone. The official record notes that the search concluded in late September 1924, when early snow made higher elevations impassable. The superintendent's final report, written in calm, detached language, closed the file. No trace found. Disappearance unexplained. The Whitehead family, desperate for information, offer reward for any discovery that might lead to the brothers' remains. Notices were distributed to nearby towns and ranger stations, but none brought results. As winter settled over Glacier, the file was boxed and shelved with other administrative correspondence. No additional leads would ever surface. In time, the story became one of the park's earliest unsolved disappearances, a mystery without rumor or resolution. 2 names written in a chalet logbook, 2 lives folded into the mountains, leaving only silence where their trail should have continued. The alarm began quietly, almost reluctantly, as though those first to feel unease wanted to believe the brothers were simply delayed by beauty, that Glacier had attained them with its endless ridgelines and cloud-wrapped summits. But by the 3rd day, when their absence could no longer be softened by optimism, that unease hardened into the grim momentum of a search. The Whitehead brothers, Joe and Bill, had been last seen leaving Granite Park Chalet on a clear August morning in 1924, walking toward the vast openness of the Highline Trail. They carried simple packs, a map, and a promise to return before nightfall. When they did not, the silence of the mountain became a thing people could feel, a heavy, physical presence that settled in the lodge corridors and ranger stations across the park. At first, those who knew them waited. Guests at the chalet suggested they may have taken a wrong turn, perhaps explored a basin off the trail. Rangers noted that hikers occasionally spent extra nights in the backcountry. But the hours stretched, then days, and soon Glacier's local rangers and volunteers were mobilized. Horses were saddled, supply caches prepared, and men fanned out from Granite Park and many Glacier, sweeping ravines and cirques that folded into shadow beneath the garden wall. The early searches followed logic, along the Highline, toward Swiftcoin Pass, down into the hidden valleys carved by ice and time. Crews shouted their names until voices grew hoarse and were lost to the wind. Others studied footprints and crushed grass for any sign of descent from the trail. Nothing, not a scrap of cloth, not a campfire ring, only untouched wilderness and the sound of water moving endlessly through stone. By the weeks, and the effort grew, additional park staff and local residents joined. The Great Northern Railway, which maintained Glacier's mountain chalets, lent guides familiar with the terrain. Their knowledge carried weight. They knew where avalanches lingered even in summer, where cliffs disguised themselves as gentle slopes. But even their expertise produced no trace. The Whiteheads, it seemed, had vanished into air. Newspapers picked up the story within days. The Kalispell Daily Interlake and Great Falls Tribune ran brief columns about 2 brothers lost in Glacier Park. The tone was restrained, factual. Hikers missing. Search ongoing. But beneath the print lay the unspoken dread that the wilderness had claimed them. Glacier, in 1924, was still raw and unyielding. Trails were narrow, signage minimal, and communication between ranger stations limited to word carried by horseback. A single misstep could erase a person from all maps. As search parties expanded their grid, the weather began to shift. Afternoon storms rolled over the Continental Divide, draping the park in mist. Visibility shrank. Rain softened the ground, washing away prints and evidence. In one account, a ranger described the slopes above Swiftcoin Pass as too slick for safe travel, the rock giving underfoot. Still, the search pressed on. For the families back in Montana, each telegram brought more anxiety than hope. Updates were sparse. Search continues. No sign found. Rumors drifted through towns. Sightings of 2 men near Logan Pass. Talk of a campsite near 50 Mountain. None were confirmed. In that era, the park was too vast for certainty. Men could vanish between drainages only a mile apart and never be seen again. 10 days after the disappearance, the search command was centered at Granite Park Chalet, the brothers' last known location. From there, teams moved methodically down the slopes toward Lake McDonald and Swiftkin Creek, marking search routes on crude maps. Supplies dwindled, morale thinned. Some men argued the brothers might have fallen into one of the park's innumerable crevasses or been caught in a rock slide unnoticed amid the summer storms. Others clung to the belief that they were still alive, injured but waiting. Then came a faint lead, what one ranger described as a possible sighting of smoke high above the Swiftcurrent Valley. A small group set out, climbing through rain and fog, to reach the ridge by nightfall. They found nothing. No ashes, no gear, no trace of fire. The smoke, if it had existed at all, had belonged to the mountain's own shifting weather. After nearly 2 weeks, the coordinated search began a fragment. The great northern guides returned to their routes. Rangers were reassigned to fire watch and patrol. What had begun with the urgency of rescue now slid quietly toward resignation. In the reports that followed, the language changed from locate to recover, a subtle but devastating shift in tone. By early September, park officials concluded that the Whitehead brothers were presumed dead. Their disappearance was officially logged. The details entered into Glacier Park records. Last seen August 24th, 1924, departing Granite Park Chalet. Extensive search conducted. No remains or belongings found. When the teams withdrew, the park returned to silence. The trails they had scoured grew over with alpine grass. Granite Park Chalet closed for the season, its shutters drawn against the oncoming snow. And beneath those peaks, the unanswered question remained. Where had two brothers gone on a clear summer morning, and how could an entire mountain keep their secret so completely? In the official files, the language was clinical, but among those who had searched, the feeling was not. Glacier had taken many before, but never so completely. Never two men walking together, leaving no trace between them. What lingered was not merely mystery, but a sense of the impossible, that the wilderness could absorb memory itself, leaving behind nothing but wind, stone, and the faint echo of their names lost to time. When the telegram stopped, silence filled the Whitehead homes like a slow-moving flood. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of something unspeakable, a waiting that turned into dread. The disappearance of Joe and Bill Whitehead, two brothers who had walked away from Granite Park Chalet on an August morning in 1924 and never returned, became a private earthquake that rippled outward from the Montana plains into every newspaper and ranger station that tried to make sense of what had happened. In Great Falls, their parents held on to the first reports with fragile optimism. Both men had known the mountains. They were strong, self-reliant, not the type to wander unprepared. The family expected word that the brothers had been found, perhaps delayed by injury or weather. When the search extended into its second week, the tone of the updates changed. What began as, "We're doing everything we can," turned to, "We found no trace." Each sentence, even when written with restraint, carried the blunt weight of finality. Letters between park officials and relatives survived from that period, brief, formal exchanges that reveal the limits of both communication and compassion in the 1920s. "We regret to inform you," one note reads, "that despite exhaustive search operations, no discovery has been made regarding the whereabouts of your sons." It was a language of bureaucracy, but beneath the formality lay the deep unease of men who had spent weeks combing those mountains and could not explain what they had not found. In Kalispell, residents followed the story with equal parts curiosity and sorrow. The Great Northern Railway's Glacier Division, which had first reported the disappearance, faced inquiries from travelers who had stayed at Granite Park Chalet around the same time. Some remembered chatting briefly with the brothers, describing them as polite, confident, well-equipped. Others recalled nothing at all. Two more hikers among dozens who passed through the backcountry that season. The summer of 1924 had seen record visitors, and in that bustle, the moment of their departure might have appeared utterly ordinary. For the families, it was that ordinariness that made the loss unbearable. The brothers hadn't vanished in a storm or while crossing an ice field. They had left a lodge, visible from the porch of Granite Park, on a clear morning beneath blue skies. To lose them without cause or witness felt like an affront to logic. Their parents asked whether animals could have been involved, or perhaps a fall had sent them into a hidden crevice. Rangers offered no clear answer. The terrain, they said, could conceal anything. Weeks passed, and autumn began to press its cold hand against the peaks. The Park Service scaled down the search, acknowledging what everyone already knew. After so much time exposed to the elements, survival was impossible. The official record listed the brothers as presumed deceased. No memorial service was held in the park. Their names were simply added to the roster of the lost. In the years that followed, the Whitehead family lived in the uneasy space between mourning and uncertainty. Without bodies, there could be no burial. Without answers, no true closure. Newspaper clippings yellowed in drawers. Every few years, when new rangers joined Glacier staff, the story resurfaced. Two brothers gone without trace, retold in staff lodges as a cautionary tale. Stay on the trail, older rangers would say. Don't let the mountain take you like it took the Whiteheads. For those who had searched, the memory was sharper. Some wrote of it later, describing the strange emptiness of the effort, the sense that the mountain itself resisted discovery. In one ranger's report, the words still carry quiet disbelief. No signs, no equipment, no clothing. It is as though they walked into the clouds and never came down. Families of other lost hikers occasionally contacted the Whiteheads over the years, seeking shared solace or understanding. Each time, the conversation circled back to the same haunting truth. Glacier National Park was vast, indifferent, and at times merciless. Its beauty was the same thing that made it dangerous. Endless, unbroken wilderness where the line between wonder and peril vanished in a heartbeat. By the early 1930s, a decade after the disappearance, Glacier had changed. Trails were improved, signage added, and ranger patrols expanded. But the Whitehead case remained unsolved, standing as one of the earliest documented vanishings within the park's rugged interior. It became a benchmark for loss. The story rangers mentioned when newcomers underestimated the terrain, or when tourists asked if people ever really disappear in national parks. In the Whitehead homes, photographs of Joe and Bill still hung on the walls. Family recollections suggest they were inseparable, the kind of brothers who shared jokes, gear, and a stubborn streak that made them venture further than most. Their absence left an emptiness that never closed. Over time, as new generations arrived and the world modernized, the details blurred, but the outline of the tragedy remained. Two men had walked into Glacier's heart and never returned, leaving only questions. The park, meanwhile, continued to draw visitors seeking solitude or spectacle, unaware that beneath its snowfields lay the unmarked stories of those who never came back. For the families, that knowledge was both comfort and torment. The brothers' final resting place was somewhere breathtaking, yes, but also unreachable, forever folded into the landscape that had refused to give them back. The official record closes a chapter neatly, almost antiseptically. Search concluded. No remains recovered. Yet for those who carried the weight of their names, the story never ended. It lingered, in letters never answered, in trails they never walked again, and in the quiet belief that the mountains, beautiful as they were, could still hold secrets too heavy for words. By the time the 1930s arrived, the Whitehead brothers' disappearance had already passed into the folklore of Glacier National Park, not as a campfire ghost story, but as a quiet, enduring mystery. Rangers spoke of it with a mixture of reverence and discomfort. The park had seen deaths before, but not vanishings as clean. No gear, no trace. It defied even the logic of wilderness. For years after the official search was called off, the park's seasonal rhythm continued. Summer visitors, autumn closures, winter silence. Yet the memory of 1924 lingered, surfacing each time a ranger traversed the Highline Trail or guided guests through the passes above Granite Park. The story returned like a shadow, subtle but inescapable. In the mid-1930s, Glacier's administration underwent a new phase of trail development. A few veteran rangers, still haunted by the unsolved disappearance, decided to revisit sections of terrain once deemed inaccessible. One, identified in archival notes as Ranger John Swanson, had participated in the original search. His recollection was simple and unwavering. You can walk for a day and still see no sign that man ever passed that way. That summer, Swanson and a small team traced a route along the north slope of Swiftcant Mountain, a path that had been impossible to reach during the 1924 operation due to weather and landslides. Their aim was practical, part of a mapping initiative, but everyone knew what else lingered beneath the surface of their purpose. The faint hope that perhaps something, a fragment of bone, a buckle, a boot, might finally tell them what had happened to the brothers. The team found nothing, not a single clue, despite 3 days of methodical searching through shale and snowfields. They noted the changes in the landscape: erosion, new rockfall, sections where entire ledges had collapsed, and concluded that even if the Whiteheads had perished in that area, time and the mountain's shifting skin would have long since consumed the evidence. Swanson returned to headquarters and filed a short report. Area examined. No findings. Yet the case refused to stay buried. In 1940, the Kalispell Daily Interlake ran a retrospective piece on Glacier's early mysteries. It named the Whitehead brothers among the park's first recorded disappearances, framing them as a cautionary tale about the unpredictable dangers of the high country. The article quoted a former park official who said simply, "They were good men who walked into a place that doesn't give back." That line became the unofficial epitaph of the story, repeated, misquoted, and remembered long after the paper itself faded. Over the next 2 decades, Glacier grew more modern, more accessible. Helicopters began to assist in rescues. Radios linked ranger outposts. The park was no longer the same isolated wilderness it had been in 1924. But even with these advances, when new hikers went missing, and they still did, the rangers often recalled the Whiteheads. It was as if their story had established a baseline of mystery that every subsequent disappearance echoed. In 1953, nearly 30 years after the brothers vanished, a curious report came from a backcountry patrol near 50 Mountain. A ranger found an old piece of rusted metal protruding from the soil, possibly part of a camping stove or field tool. Nearby, fragments of cloth, long decayed, were scattered among the scree. The find was logged and quietly examined, but experts determined the artifacts were more recent, likely discarded by hunters or hikers in the 1940s. The Whitehead file was not reopened. Still, the park's oral history kept their names alive. Guides at Granite Park Chalet told guests of the 2 men who had set out and never come back. They pointed to the ridgelines that swallowed their trail and spoke of how swiftly weather could erase the tracks of even the most careful travelers. "If you linger long enough," one veteran guide told a journalist in 1961, "you can almost hear them in the wind call at each other across the divide." By then, Glacier's archives contained only a few yellowed pages on the case: the original incident report, a series of telegrams to Great Falls, and a handful of search logs. The details were sparse, but the tone was unmistakable: frustration, exhaustion, disbelief. It was the voice of men who had done everything right and still found nothing. In 1974, exactly 50 years after the disappearance, a regional historian named Vince Moravec published What Happened in Glacier National Park, a collection of the park's most enduring mysteries. Among them was the disappearance of the Whitehead brothers. Moravec's retelling, drawn from park records and interviews with surviving rangers, brought the case back into public attention. His version was measured, factual, and respectful, but his closing line captured what so many had long felt. The mountain kept it secret, and time has learned to leave it alone. That book reawakened quiet speculation. Visitors began asking about the brothers again, wondering aloud what could cause 2 men to vanish so completely. Rangers repeated what had become the only honest answer: the park is vast, its terrain merciless, and even the surest trail can turn treacherous with one step. When the story resurfaced in the late 20th century, it was no longer about loss alone. It had become a symbol of Glacier's dual nature, beauty and peril intertwined. For some, it was a tragedy. For others, a reminder of the limits of human certainty. The park had grown safer, but the Whitehead mystery remained unsolved, timeless in its simplicity. And so, even decades later, when the snow melts off the Highline Trail and hikers pass the stone walls of Granite Park Chalet, there's still those who pause to look west toward the valleys that swallowed the brothers' trail. Nothing visible marks the place, but the air feels older there, quieter somehow, as if it remembers. The search, in truth, never fully ended. It simply changed form. What had begun as boots on the ground and voices calling through fog became a story passed from ranger to ranger, generation to generation, a search now carried out in memory instead of movement. Because in Glacier, the past is never truly gone. It waits, silent and patient, beneath the same wind that once carried 2 brothers beyond the edge of the known world. Nearly a century after Joe and Bill Whitehead vanished into the high country of Glacier National Park, their story endures, not as legend, but as a record that refuses to fade. In the official archives, occupies only a few pages. A missing persons report dated August 1924, brief search logs, and a final notation, no trace found. Yet those sparse words have carried remarkable weight, surviving long after the paper has yellowed and the men who wrote them have passed on. For the National Park Service, the Whitehead case became a cornerstone of institutional memory, a reminder of the vulnerability that lies beneath every expedition into the wild. It was cited in internal reports through the 1930s and 1940s whenever the topic of wilderness safety arose. Even as search methods improved, radio dispatches replacing hand-carried messages, aircraft supplementing horses, the question lingered. How could two brothers, young and fit, disappear so completely within a park now crossed by trails, maps, and guides? In the decades that followed, Glacier's history filled with new rescues, tragedies, and triumphs, yet the Whiteheads remained singular. Unlike other disappearances later explained by avalanches, animal attacks, or exposure, their case offered no conclusion. It was an absence preserved in time. That absence became a kind of presence, an unseen chapter in the park's story, a whisper that surfaced every time a ranger briefed new staff about the unpredictable nature of the terrain. When It Happened in Glacier National Park was published in 1974, Vince Morvek placed the Whitehead brothers alongside other early mysteries of the region: climbers lost on Mount Cleveland, rangers swept by snowmelt rivers, hikers swallowed by sudden storms. But of all the stories he chronicled, it was theirs that most unsettled readers. The details were so ordinary, so small: a morning walk, clear skies, familiar trails, and then nothing. The book revived interest in the case, prompting local journalists to revisit old ranger logs and family archives. They found no new evidence, but they found something else, a human echo, the quiet persistence of memory itself. By then, Glacier National Park had become both safer and more accessible. Helicopters now patrolled remote valleys. Satellite beacons had begun to replace compasses. But technology could not erase the essential truth the Whitehead case represented: that wilderness is not a place that guarantees return. For every well-marked trail, there remain uncharted folds of earth where nature still moves by its own ancient logic. The brothers' families did not live to see closure. Their names appear occasionally in historical compilations of early park incidents, listed beside others who met the same fate. But to those who have studied Glacier's past, their disappearance stands apart. It marks a threshold between eras, the time before search and rescue became procedure, before every hiker's route was logged and monitored. They were among the last of the truly untraceable. In the decades that followed, park rangers turned historians sought to preserve the details. A few even retraced the original search routes on foot, photographing the terrain for comparison. Their findings confirmed what the 1924 searchers had already known. The landscape itself had changed. Rock slides had shifted entire slopes, snowfields had carved new channels, and time had erased even the faintest evidence of human passage. The mountain had rewritten itself. By the early 2000s, digital archives brought new life to the case. Researchers digitized early ranger journals and regional newspaper clippings, ensuring that the Whitehead story would not disappear with the paper. Each entry, though concise, carried the same unyielding weight. Two brothers, last seen leaving Granite Park Chalet, never found. To historians, the precision of that phrasing mattered. It reflected both the thoroughness of the search and the enormity of the mystery. Today, the Whitehead disappearance occupies a strange intersection between history and myth. It remains entirely factual, every name, date, and location verifiable, yet it has acquired a haunting tone that resists reduction to record alone. To walk the Highline Trail is to follow, unknowingly, the same ridgeline they once walked. To rest at Granite Park Chalet is to stand at the same wooden porch where they took their last known steps. The landscape has changed, but the quiet around it feels the same, a stillness that draws thought backward in time. Among Glacier's modern rangers, the brothers' story serves a dual purpose: instruction and remembrance. They mention it in safety briefings, not as folklore, but as history. It's a way of acknowledging that even with all progress, GPS, helicopters, rescue teams, the wilderness retains its sovereignty. Respect the mountain, One ranger tells visitors, "It remembers." Every few years, when hikers vanish and searches stretch into days, the name Whitehead resurfaces in conversation. Spoken softly, almost reverently, it stands as shorthand for all that is unknowable about this place. Some losses can be explained. Others, like theirs, endure as the measure of mystery itself. Nearly 100 years later, nothing definitive has been found. No bones, no personal effects, no clues. Just their names, preserved in reports and in the memory of a park that has long since learned to keep its secrets. When visitors today pause at the edge of the Highline Trail and look toward the endless folds of the Continental Divide, they often remark on the view, how it seems to stretch beyond time. For those who know the story, it's impossible not to wonder. Somewhere out there, under layers of rock and snow, does the mountain still hold them? The record ends where it began, with a simple entry in the 1924 logbook. No speculation, no flourish, just the truth of what is known. Joseph Whitehead and William Whitehead, missing since August 24th, 1924. Last seen departing Granite Park Chalet. Search concluded. No trace found. And in that quiet, unadorned statement, perhaps the most haunting line ever written in Glacier's long and storied history, the mountain keeps its silence still. Time has a way of softening the edges of tragedy, but some stories resist that mercy. The disappearance of Joe and Bill Whitehead remains one of those rare, immovable mysteries. Too old for witnesses, too stark for embellishment, and too incomplete to fade entirely. Nearly a century later, Glacier National Park still bears their absence like a faint scar across its otherwise unbroken wilderness. Every generation of rangers inherits the story. It's passed along not as superstition, but as a kind of right, a caution that beneath the postcard beauty of the park lies an immensity that cannot be tamed. Their names appear now only in fragments, old reports, brief mentions in guidebooks, and a line in Moravec's, "It happened in Glacier National Park." Yet even those few words are enough to stir something. Two brothers, August 1924. Last seen at Granite Park Chalet. No trace found. No one alive today remembers their faces firsthand, but memory has a way of transforming into place. When the late summer wind sweeps over the Highline Trail, you can feel the weight of their story in the stillness between gusts. The same sunlight that once warmed their shoulders now falls on the stone steps of the chalet, on the endless green sweep below the garden wall, on the routes they never return from. Everything endures except the men themselves. The park has changed since then. Helicopters now patrol its skies during rescues, and GPS trackers log every ranger's path. What once took days of searching can now be mapped in hours. But none of these advances could rewrite the Whitehead mystery. In a place as vast and layered as Glacier, there are still corners untouched by time, hidden ravines and rock slides that have swallowed whole centuries. Even with modern tools, the idea that someone could disappear completely is not impossible. It has happened before. It will happen again. When archivists revisited the original 1924 search reports for digitization, they noted the tone of the handwriting. Steady, careful, but edged with disbelief. Rangers who were used to recovering bodies could not reconcile the total absence of evidence. "We covered every possible trail," one wrote. "It is not possible that they walked away unseen." The words reveal more than frustration. They carry the quiet awe of men forced to confront the limits of their understanding. And perhaps that is why the Whitehead case endures, not just because it happened, but because it exposes the fragile boundary between certainty and mystery. Even the most meticulous search, the most rational explanation, can dissolve in the face of wilderness. The mountain is not cruel. It is simply indifferent, governed by forces too vast for the briefness of human time. By the 1980s, the brothers' story had entered the lexicon of Glacier's unofficial history, a marker used by guides and historians alike to measure the park's early years. When rangers stood at the chalet during seasonal training, someone would always point toward the West Ridge and say, "That's where the Whitehead brothers were last seen." The newcomers would look out, eyes narrowing at the endless folds of the land, and fall silent. There is no monument, no cross, no cairn, only distance. A century's worth of storms have swept the slopes since their disappearance. Avalanches have reshaped valleys. The park's geology has shifted in subtle, ceaseless ways. If any trace of them still exists, it lies deep beneath snow-melt and stone, beyond reach, beyond recognition. Yet their story remains startlingly intact, held together not by evidence but by attention. It has survived because people refuse to let it die. Today, hikers pause at the chalet, reading the weather plaque about Granite Park's history. Some ask about the Whitehead brothers, their curiosity caught by a stray sentence in a guidebook. Rangers tell the story briefly, sparing the drama but keeping the truth. 2 men walked out and never came back. The hikers listen, then fall quiet. When they finally shoulder their packs and step back onto the trail, they do so with a little more care. Perhaps that is the Whiteheads' lasting legacy. Not fear, not legend, but respect. Their absence is a reminder that nature is not something to be conquered or consumed. It is something to be entered with humility. In every gust of wind, in every echo along the cliffs, the park seems to whisper that simple truth. The mountain owes you nothing. At dusk, when the light turns gold over the divide, Granite Park Chalet casts long shadows across the ridge. Somewhere in that glow lies the same horizon the brothers once walked toward. The trail fades into distance, then into mist. And so the record stands, unaltered, absolute. Joseph Whitehead and William Whitehead, missing since August 24th, 1924. Search concluded. No trace found. The mountain keeps its silence. The years move on. And beneath the sound of wind and water, their story endures, not as myth, but as the unbroken truth of 2 men who stepped into the wilderness and became part of it forever.